Hi, everyone. I wanted to share an encouragement today from our memory verse. And so the context of our memory verse is that one of the scribes asked Jesus, "Teacher, what is the great commandment of the law?" And then Jesus replies that you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And this is actually a quotation from the book of Deuteronomy. And I just want to share from that passage today. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 5. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 5. The context of Deuteronomy is that the Israelites have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years now, and they're about to enter the promised land. And before they enter the promised land, Moses gives a series of speeches to remind the Israelites to follow the Lord. And Moses at this time also knew that he wasn't going to enter the promised land. He wasn't going to be their leader for much longer. And so you can imagine the burden on Moses' heart to remind these people that, hey, I'm going to be gone, but these are the things you must keep in mind. And so that is the burden which I believe Moses had these different speeches in the book of Deuteronomy. And one thing he says there is in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 5, and that's from our memory verse. He says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." And one thing which stood out to me from this particular verse is that this specific wording of this commandment was never something that was actually in the Ten Commandments. It wasn't something that I found in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers. It wasn't something that God specifically gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. Moses did get the command to say that you shall have no other gods before me. But this specific wording to say, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, I wasn't able to find that anywhere other than this book of Deuteronomy. And the way that spoke to me is that it's almost as if Moses, at the end of his life, when he's giving these speeches back to the Israelites, he was actually speaking from his own experience. After walking with the Lord for so long, he realized this was the most important thing. And he was speaking out of that experience. And you realize that the most important thing is to love the Lord your God with all your heart. And that was a big encouragement to me, just to remind me of what's the most important things in my life. And when I look at someone like Moses, you can see he was mightily used by God. He was a leader. He wrote scripture. He did miracles. He did so many things. But at the end of his life, he still realized the most important thing is to love the Lord. And I want to apply that for myself, because sometimes as a young person, I can think the great thing is to do something big for the Lord. I want to accomplish something for the Lord while I'm here. And while I do believe it's good to serve the Lord, it also reminds me that the most important thing is not simply just service, but to love him with all my heart. And that's one thing that stood out to me from this verse. The other thing is I was reminded of how Moses said this. Remember that at this point, they're about to enter the promised land. And there's one thing that Moses really, really wanted, and that was to enter the promised land himself. He wanted to enter Canaan. But we also know from other parts of scripture that he disobeyed God once. And because of that disobedience, he was never able to enter that promised land. And so it stood out to me that even though Moses never got what he truly wanted, yet he was still able to say to others, you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart. And so that was also another reminder for me that even if the Lord doesn't necessarily answer my prayers in the way that I want, or things don't work out the way I thought they would, nevertheless, it's still important. The important thing is to love the Lord with all your heart. And Moses, I think, was a wonderful example for me for that. And if we move on from verse 5, we read from verses 6 and 7 something else that the Lord commands us through Moses. He says, "These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you walk, when you sit in the house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." And so not only does Moses say that we are to love the Lord our God with all our hearts, but if you look at the next verses, what he's saying is that we are to teach our children the same thing. In verse 7, we say, "You shall teach them diligently to your sons." What is the thing that we're supposed to teach to our sons? And in the context, it's that we're to teach them to love the Lord with all our hearts. And for me, as a very young parent, very inexperienced, this gave me a good indication for the direction that I need to bring my children to in terms of their walk with the Lord, that they are to love the Lord. And I think of it like this, because right now as a father, I can give my children so many resources. I can give them all these Sunday school videos and Sunday school books, and it's good. They can learn all the stories, and they should. But there's a big difference I've seen that between simply knowing all the stories versus loving the Lord themselves. Let me give an example. For those of you who know me, I privately, that's great. I think I'd be happy about that. But I would much rather have my children be able to say, "Hey, Daddy, I want to go play basketball with you. Hey, Daddy, can I have the ball? I want to go play by myself." And just have them love the sport of basketball. That for me would bring so much more joy. And so in the same way, when I think about teaching my children, it's not simply just teaching them to know all the scriptures, which is good. But I hope that when they leave this home, they can also love the Lord, that they would say, "Hey, I want to have a relationship with the Lord myself, that I want to read the Bible because I think it's interesting. I think it's a beautiful book, not because Daddy told me I should read it." And if they can have this type of attitude towards the Lord, then I feel like that would be a success. And so that was also a reminder for me from this passage, not to simply teach them just the knowledge of it, but hopefully when my children leave, that they would truly love the Lord and pursue them themselves. And then I just want to share one last thing from this passage. And we see in verse 12 that Moses also gives a warning to the Israelites. And he says this, verse 12, "Then watch yourself, that you do not forget the Lord who brought you from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." And in this context, what Moses is saying is that to all the Israelites, after you've gone into the promised land, after everything has gone so well for you, be careful that you don't forget the Lord. And I think that's a wonderful reminder for me, myself, that when things are going well, when the Lord's done so many things for me, not to forget him. Notice Moses never said, "Hey, don't hate the Lord." He wasn't worried about that. But he was worried that people would forget the Lord. And that's something different. It's like if I were to, I think of my wife, and let's say I take her to a company party, and I take her to this company party, and I end up spending the whole time talking to all my coworkers and having a great time. And my wife is just in a corner by herself. I'm still loyal to my wife. I'm still married to her. I still treat her well. But at that moment, I've completely forgotten about her. And in the same way that Moses was saying to Israelites, be careful that you don't forget the Lord like this. When he blesses you with so many different things, physically and spiritually, don't forget the Lord. And for me, it was a warning because right now I'm married with kids, and there's a lot more distractions in my life than when I was single. When I was single, it was just myself and the Lord. There wasn't that much distractions, and it was easy to focus on the Lord. But now with kids and with work, there's so many things else that's going on. And I felt like the lesson for me from that verse is to say, don't forget the Lord. Don't let these distractions come between you and the Lord. So I want to end with a word of hope, a word of encouragement. And if you could turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 6. Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 6. How do we fulfill this commandment of loving the Lord our God with all our hearts? And this is a wonderful promise that I like. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6. It says this, "Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, so that you may live." And I like that word circumcise, which means to cut off. And there's a promise here that says that the Lord's going to help me, not only just me, but even my children, to cut off every single distraction so that we are able to have a pure, devoted relationship into the Lord. And so sometimes when I see God's promises, they can seem so high. Loving the Lord with all your heart, it doesn't seem like an easy thing for me to do. But I was also so encouraged to say that the Lord gives me the exact promise that he's going to help me to meet that particular commandment. So I just want to say in faith that I believe this is something the Lord will do. He's going to circumcise my heart. He's going to circumcise the wife of my children. And so that as one family, we're going to be a group of people that love the Lord with all our hearts. And that's something that has encouraged me. Thanks for letting me share today.
Thanks, Brother Wenhai. I wanted to share from Luke 18, starting at verse 10. This is the parable of the Pharisee, and a text, no, not parable, but the story that that Jesus talked about the Pharisee and a tax collector, praying. This is a passage that God has brought to my mind over and over and over again, and has really become very essential in my walk with the Lord, and it has really kept me in the right path. And so it starts that two men went up in the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and Pharisee stood and was praying this to himself: God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, swindlers, unjust, adulterers, and even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I pay tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast or his chest, saying, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. I'll tell you, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. And in my walk with the Lord, I have experienced both of these men in my own life. I have experienced both of these hearts in my own life. First we see the Pharisees' prayer, which is, for me, I see that this is a picture of a heart that is always comparing, to other people, always comparing my life to other people, and in many cases in my own life, when I compare myself with other people, I either become complacent with my spiritual walk, or I become proud of my spiritual walk. So I never land in the right place. I'm always in the wrong place when I compare with other people. And when I think that I'm better just because I don't sin like other people, I become blinded of my own spiritual death. And I may think that I'm okay, but I'm really far from being okay. And even worse, that I can thank God that I don't sin like other people, forgetting that without God I am as vulnerable and as weak and as sinful like my fellow brother. um and this Pharisee prayer is just a picture of a heart that loves places of high honor. It's a heart that it's removed from God, or he removed God from its throne just to sit in it. And everything must revolve around the heart, and everything must please the heart and all that. And it's a very sad situation to be in. I hope that God continue to delivers me from that, because there's a very slippery slope from a heart that is on the right track, and all of a sudden the heart just goes to the wrong track and starts comparing. It's very easy to be deceived by it. And then there is the heart of the tax collector, and I see, you see the tax collector's prayer here. And when I'm thinking about that, this is a picture of a truly repentant heart that looks and judge himself. That, and when compared, now obviously, when judge that looks and judge himself when compared to the right person, which is Jesus Christ himself. That's the only person that I must compare myself with. And it's a heart that it is not looking at the speck of the other person's heart, but it's a heart that has been, that the heart that God has opened its eyes to focus on the plank of its own eye. And I hope that I have a heart like this one. And there is there's a very unique phrase in this passage that really paints a picture of the truly repentant heart. And it's on verse 13. It says, but the tax collector, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but he was beating his breast, saying, God, be merciful to the sinner. The image of this beating of the chest shows me that the tax collector was weeping very bitterly. I don't think he was confessing his sin. He was desperately pleading with God to save him from his sin. He was not looking at his fellow Jew that was praying at the temple. He was looking at himself, and he was reminded of all the times that he cheated, and that he lied, and that he coveted money, and that he had unworthy thoughts. And he was just so desperate to be rid of it. And it's just amazing. And I really appreciate to be reminded to have a reminder of this beating of the chest. It's very powerful to me. But God's love, which is deeper than the pit that I can ever be in, comes and justifies me and saves me. And I have been where this man is, and I believe that Peter also have been where this man is. This beating of the chest is a very desperate need for God's mercy. And but after I get God's mercy, then I can live with God's grace, which is much better. And I really need this heart if I am to walk in Jesus' footstep. And just to conclude, and as long as I stop comparing myself to others and begin to look at my own heart and judge myself every day, to fix my eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of my faith, and Jesus will give me grace to overcome every sin that I have and that I will ever face, and who will make me like him. I trust that God will do this in my life. Thank you, Rose.
So Matthew 22, verse 37. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. A few weeks back, I felt like I lacked motivation when it came to reading the Bible or praying. And I felt I wasn't faithful in that. And thankfully, God showed me that one of the reasons for the lack of motivation was because I wasn't loving him as I ought to. But I was also encouraged by a memory verse for this week. And something he showed me was that if the greatest commandment is to love the Lord with all my heart, then it also means that one of the most important prayer I can pray is that the Lord should help me to love him more day by day. And I was also encouraged by verses like John 14, verse 15, that says, if I love God, I will keep his commandments. Or Genesis 29, verse 20, where it gives the example of Jacob, who served Laban to get Rachel, and he served for 7 years. But those 7 years were like 7 days to him because of the love he had for her. And also 1 John 5:3, which says that this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. And so I believe that the more I take this first commandment seriously of obeying God, of loving God with all my heart, then a lot of other commandments would be easier for me to keep. And so it will be easier for me to love my brothers and sisters in Christ. It will be easier for me to love my neighbors more and even my enemies. And it will also be easier for me to serve the Lord faithfully and die to self day by day. And if this love for God is great and is increasing, then these commandments won't feel burdensome to me. And I'm thankful for the fact that since God showed me this and I've sought to even pray more for this, I've seen the Lord really help me both to love him more and to be faithful in a lot of these little areas. And so my prayer is that I would love the Lord more day by day, and not just me, but each one of us would love him more. Thank you.
I'd like to share on last week's memory verse, Isaiah 54:13. All your children will be taught of the Lord, and the well-being of your children will be great. So when every parent is burdened for their children, and anybody that loves the Lord their biggest burden will be that their children love God and put him first and follow him. And in that regard, Matthew 6 has been a huge comfort to me, that God is so loving. He cares for even the birds and the lilies of the field, that he'll give our children not just the physical needs, but the spiritual ones too. The greatest one to be to follow him and put him first, and salvation. And so I've been encouraged by a lot of the promises in the Bible, like this one in Isaiah 54 and Matthew 6, but that sometimes the temptation has come in to worry, not that God will come in short, but what if I come in short? What if I come up short? What if I know that God will take care of my kids, but my temptation to worry can sometimes be, what if I don't do good enough as a parent? And the answer that the Lord's comforted me with is this stories like the boy of the 5 loaves and 2 fish, that he had a little bit. It wasn't perfect, but the Lord was able to multiply it. And the Lord can do a lot if we give our little to him and recognize our lack, but that the Lord needs to do something with it. And It doesn't mean that we don't do anything. We definitely, God feeds the birds, but he doesn't drop food into their nests every day. The birds fly around, but as they fly around, he feeds them. He helps them as they do it. And so that just encouraged me that God will care for our children, not as we sit around doing nothing, but as we show them the beauty of Jesus in the home, as we do our best. We're not perfect, but as we teach them bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, a lot that we've heard today, that we can have faith in the Lord, that he'll multiply our feeble efforts, and he'll turn the water that we pour into them, the Lord will turn into wine. And so it's given me faith that he'll take care of our kids and bring them to him, not just make them Christians, but disciples, like professing Christians, but wholehearted disciples, and to love him. So I've been encouraged by promises like these. He's given us a lot in the Bible to encourage us for our kids.